Have you ever just stopped and wondered why some people seem to get rich so easily, while so many others work their tails off their entire lives and just struggle? Well, a huge piece of that puzzle comes down to what you were taught about money. Today, we're going to dive into the really powerful and sometimes controversial ideas from Robert Kiyosaki's famous book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, to really get a handle on two completely different ways of thinking about money.
So let's just jump right in with a puzzle. Imagine you have two key financial mentors in your life. One of them tells you your house is your biggest, most important asset, and the other one looks you straight in the eye and says, no, your house is a liability, and it's draining your money. I mean, who are you supposed to believe? This one, jarring difference in opinion, is really the key that unlocks the entire philosophy of the book.
To even start to solve that puzzle, we've got to understand the two men who gave the author his real financial education. And it didn't happen in a school classroom. Nope. It happened by watching two very different father figures. His own dad, who he calls Poor Dad, and his best friend's father, his Rich Dad. Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, because it kind of flips everything we think we know upside down. Poor Dad was actually the author's biological father, a really smart, highly educated guy with a PhD and a stable government job. But even with a good salary, he was always struggling with bills. Rich Dad, on the other hand, he was a school dropout, never even finished the 8th grade, but he went on to become one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii. Crazy, right? So how did Rich Dad teach? Not with lectures or textbooks, that's for sure. The book's very first and probably most famous lesson started when 9-year-old Robert Kiyosaki just asked a simple question. Can you teach me how to make money? Well, the lesson he got was not what he expected. It was a real-life simulation. So what was this big first job? Rich Dad had him and his friend Mike work for 3 hours every single Saturday, dusting old, crusty canned goods in one of his corner stores for a measly 10 cents an hour. I mean, can you imagine? It was brutally boring work for practically no money at all. After a few weeks of this, Robert was completely fed up, frustrated, and ready to quit. And that was the exact aha moment Rich Dad was waiting for. He explained that this feeling, this being underpaid, unappreciated, and pushed around, that's how life teaches you. Most people just react with their emotions. They either quit or they ask for a tiny raise. But the real key is to stop, think, and use your brain to find a totally different way out.
And that whole experience is the perfect illustration of what he called the rat race. It's this endless cycle that's driven by two really powerful emotions. First, you've got the fear of not having enough money, so that makes you go out and get a job. Then, the second you get that paycheck, greed or desire kicks in, and you start thinking about all the cool stuff you can buy. And that pattern of fear and desire just keeps people working harder and harder, but they never actually get ahead. They're just stuck on a hamster wheel, running in circles.
So how in the world do you escape this rat race? Well, Rich Dad's answer was surprisingly simple. You have to become financially literate. You've got to learn the language of money, and it all boils down to truly understanding just two little words. First up, an asset. Now forget all the complicated technical definitions you've probably heard. Rich Dad's definition is incredibly simple and totally practical. An asset is anything that puts money in your pocket. That's it. End of story. You can just think of it like this. The cash flow from a real asset is like a one-way street, with money flowing straight into your wallet. It could be the rents you get from a property, dividends from a stock, or royalties from something you created. It's basically money that's working for you. And that second word, a liability, is just the exact opposite. It's anything that takes money out of your pocket. Simple, right? But this is where so many of us get tripped up. The cash flow of a liability is like a river of money flowing away from you. It's your car payment, your student loans, your credit card debt, and yeah, according to Rich Dad, it's even your home mortgage. All of these things are constantly taking money out of your pocket, which is exactly why he called his own home a liability. So here's the bottom line. This single rule is pretty much the foundation of Rich Dad's entire way of thinking. The wealthy spend their lives buying assets. Everybody else? They spend their money and their lives buying liabilities, usually because they've been taught to believe those liabilities are actually assets. Okay, so you get the difference between an asset and a liability. That's the what. But how do you actually put it into practice? Well, the next core idea is also surprisingly simple. You have to mind your own business. To explain this, the book tells this great story about Ray Kroc, the guy who founded McDonald's. He was speaking to a group of MBA students one day, and he asked them a very simple question.
And of course, they all said the obvious thing. You're in the hamburger business. But Kroc just laughed and told them that his real business wasn't selling burgers at all. It was acquiring incredibly valuable real estate at the best intersections all over the world. The hamburgers, they just paid the bills for his real business.
See, that story just perfectly highlights this critical difference we all need to understand. Your profession, that's your job. It's what you do to get a paycheck. You work for money. But your business, that's your asset column. That's where your money starts working for you, even when you're not on the clock. So the strategy is this. Keep your day job, that's your profession, but you use the income you make from it to seriously start building your own business. And that means buying real assets, like the ones you see here, things that will eventually create enough cash flow to set you totally free. Now, all of this sounds pretty good in theory, right? But Rich Dad was smart. He knew that just knowing this stuff isn't enough. The reason most people don't do it isn't because they lack information. It's because they're held back by these really powerful roadblocks inside their own heads. And the book really points to these 4 things as the main dream killers. You've got fear, specifically the fear of losing money, which just paralyzes people. Then there's cynicism, that little voice in your head or from your friends that says, oh, that'll never work. Then there's just plain old laziness, finding excuses instead of finding the time. And finally, bad habits, like paying all your bills first and only saving what's left, which is usually nothing. Let's just zoom in on one of the most powerful mental blockers there is. That simple phrase, I can't afford it. How many times have we all said that? According to Rich Dad, those 4 words are a complete mental dead end. The second you say them, your brain just shuts down and stops looking for any kind of solution. But just watch what happens when you make one tiny change. When you turn that statement into a question, how can I afford it? All of a sudden, your brain is forced to wake up and start working. It opens your mind up to possibilities. Instead of just giving up, your brain actually starts trying to solve the puzzle. It's such a simple but really profound mental shift, from a closed door to an open one. So the crucial thing to take away from all this is that financial freedom isn't really about spreadsheets and complex numbers. It's a game that you play inside your own mind first. It's about changing your questions and breaking through those internal roadblocks. And that brings us to the final and really the most important question of all, the one you see on the screen. And it's not some hypothetical question for someday. It's for right now. What is the one asset that you are going to acquire this month?